Before the Fellowship was the greatest story you've never heard. I'm Greg.
I'm Thousand Cams.
I'm Dan.
Join us as we read and react to the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. Last time we began chapter 21. Túrin was the son of Hurin and Morwen. After the Easterlings came to Hithlum, Morwen sent Túrin to Doriath to seek refuge. He grew up and maintained contact with his mother and sister. When messengers no longer came to Menegroth, he armed himself and departed for Hithlum with Beleg, Cuthalion. After 3 years in the wilderness, he returned, and Mablung witnessed his involvement in the death of Anandor. Túrin fled and turned to a life of lawlessness, but Thingol pardoned him and eagerly awaited his return. Beleg searched for him and was captured and mistreated by Túrin's band of outlaws. Túrin repented of his evil deeds. Beleg tried in vain to persuade him to return to Menegroth, but pride led Túrin to refuse the pardon of the king. Today, we continue chapter 21, beginning on page 201 of the second edition. Now, Beleg returned to the Thousand Caves, and coming before Thingol and Melian, he told them of all that had befallen, save only of his evil handling by Túrin's companions. Then Thingol sighed, and he said, "What more would Túrin have me do?" "Give me leave, Lord," said Beleg, "and I will guard him, and guide him as I may. Then no man shall say that elven words are lightly spoken, nor would I wish to see so great a good run to nothing in the wild." Then Thingol gave Beleg leave to do as he would, and he said, "Beleg Cuthalion, for many deeds you have earned my thanks, but not the least is the finding of my foster son. At this parting, ask for any gift, and I will not deny it to you." "I ask then for a sword of worth," said Beleg, "for the orcs come now too thick and close for a bow only, and such blade as I have is no match for their armor." "Choose from all that I have," said Thingol, "save only Amon Rûdh, my own." Then Beleg chose Anglachel, and that was a sword of great worth, and it was so named because it was made of iron that fell from heaven as a blazing star. It would cleave all earth-delved iron. One other sword only in Middle-earth was like to it. That sword does not enter into this tale, though it was made of the same ore by the same smith, and that smith was Eöl, the dark elf, who took Aridel Turgon's sister to wife. He gave Anglachel to Thingol as fee, which he begrudged, for leave to dwell in Non-Elmoth. But its mate, Anglachel, he kept until it was stolen from him by Maeglin, his son. But as Thingol turned the hilt of Anglachel toward Beleg, Melian looked at the blade, and she said, "There is malice in this sword. The dark heart of the smith still dwells in it. It will not love the hand that it serves. Neither will it abide with you long." "Nonetheless, I will wield it while I may," said Beleg. "Another gift I will give to you, Cuthalion," said Melian. "That shall be your help in the wild, and the help also of those whom you choose." And she gave him store of lembas, the way bread of the elves, wrapped in leaves of silver, and the threads that bound it were sealed at the knots with the seal of the queen. A wafer of white wax, shaped as a single flower of Telperion. For according to the customs of the Eldalier, the keeping and giving of lembas belonged to the queen alone. In nothing did Melian show greater favor to Túrin than in this gift. For the elder had never before allowed men to use this way bread, and seldom did so again. Then Beleg departed with these from Menegroth, and went back to the northern marches, where he had his lodges and many friends. Then in Dimbar the orcs were driven back, and Anglachel rejoiced to be unsheathed. But when the winter came and war was stilled, suddenly his companions missed Beleg, and he returned to them no more. Now, when Beleg parted from the outlaws and returned into Doriath, Túrin led them away westward out of Sirion's Vale, for they grew weary of their life without rest, ever watchful and in fear of pursuit, and they sought a safer lair. And it chanced at a time of evening that they came upon 3 dwarves who fled before them. But one that lagged behind was seized and thrown down, and a man of the company took his bow and let fly an arrow at the others as they vanished in the dusk. Now the dwarf that they had taken was named Meme, and he pleaded for his life before Túrin, and offered as ransom to lead them to his hidden halls, which none might find without his aid. Then Túrin pitied Meme and spared him, and he said, "Where is your house?" Then Meme answered, "High above the lands lies the house of Meme, upon the great hill. Amon Rûdh is that hill called now, since the elves changed all the names." Then Túrin was silent, and he looked long upon the dwarf, and at last he said, "You shall bring us to that place." On the next day, they set out thither, following Meme to Amon Rûdh. Now that hill stood upon the edge of the moorlands that rose between the vales of Sirion and Narog, and high above the stony heath it reared its crown. But its steep grey head was bare, save for the red ceragon that mantled the stone. And as the men of Túrin's band drew near, the sun, westering, broke through the clouds and fell upon the crown, and the ceragon was all in flower. Then one among them said, "There is blood on the hilltop." But Meme led them by secret paths up the steep slopes of Amon Rûdh, and at the mouth of his cave he bowed to Túrin, saying, "Enter into Bodin Danwedd, the house of ransom, for so it shall be called." And now there came another dwarf, bearing light to greet him, and they spoke together and passed swiftly down into the darkness of the cave. But Túrin followed after, and came at length to a chamber far within, lit by dim lamps and hanging upon chains. There he found Meme kneeling at a stone couch beside the wall, and he tore his beard and wailed, crying one name unceasingly. And on the couch there lay a third. But Túrin, entering, stood beside Meme and offered him aid. Then Meme looked up at him and said, "You can give no aid, for this is Kim, my son, and he is dead, pierced by an arrow. He died at sunset. Ibun, my son, has told me." Then pity rose in Túrin's heart, and he said to Meme, "Alas, I would recall that shaft if I could. Now, Bodin Danwedd, this house shall be called in truth. And if ever I come to any wealth, I will pay you a ransom of gold for your son, in token of sorrow, though it gladden your heart no more." Then Meme rose and looked long at Túrin. "I hear you," he said. "You speak like a dwarf lord of old, and at that I marvel. Now my heart is cooled, though it is not glad, and in this house you may dwell if you will, for I will pay my ransom." So began the abiding of Túrin in the hidden house of Meme upon Amon Rûdh, and he walked on the greensward before the mouth of the cave and looked out east and west and north. Northward he looked, and descried the forest of Brethil climbing green about Amon Obel in its midst. And thither his eyes were drawn ever and again, he knew not why. For his heart was set rather to the northwest, where league upon league away, on the skirts of the sky, it seemed to him that he could glimpse the mountains of shadow, the walls of his home. But at evening, Túrin looked west into the sunset as the sun rode down red into the hazes above the distant coast, and the vale of Narog lay deep in the shadows between. In the time that followed, Túrin spoke much with Mîm, and sitting with him alone, he listened to his lore and the tale of his life. For Mîm came of dwarves that were banished in ancient days from the great dwarf cities of the east. And long before the return of Morgoth, they wandered westward into Beleriand. But they became diminished in stature and in smithcraft, and they took to lives of stealth, walking with bowed shoulders and furtive steps. Before the dwarves of Nogrod and Belegos came west over the mountains, the elves of Beleriand knew not what these others were, and they hunted them and slew them. But afterwards they let them alone, and they were called Noegith Nibin, the petty dwarves, in the Sindarin tongue. They loved none but themselves, and if they feared and hated the orcs, they hated the Eldar no less, and the exiles most of all, for the Noldor, they said, had stolen their lands and their homes. Long ere King Finrod Felagund came over the sea, the caves of Nargothrond were discovered by them, and by them its delving was begun. And beneath the crown of Amon Rûdh, the bald hill, the slow hands of the petty dwarves had bored and deepened the caves through the long years that they dwelt there, untroubled by the gray elves of the woods. But now at last they had dwindled and died out of Middle-earth, all save Mîm and his two sons. And Mîm was old even in the reckoning of dwarves, old and forgotten. And in his halls the smithies were idle, and the axes rested, and their name was remembered only in ancient tales of Doriath and Nargothrond. But when the year drew on to midwinter, snow came down from the north heavier than they had known it in the river vales, and Amon Rûdh was covered deep, and they said that the winters worsened in Beleriand as the power of Angband grew. Then only the hardiest dared stir abroad, and some fell sick, and all were pinched with hunger. But in the dim dusk of a winter's day, there appeared suddenly among them a man, as it seemed, of great bulk and girth, cloaked and hooded in white, and he walked up to the fire without a word. And when men sprang up in fear, he laughed and threw back his hood, and beneath his wide cloak he bore a great pack. And in the light of the fire, Túrin looked again on the face of Beleg Cuthalion. Thus, Beleg returned once more to Túrin, and their meeting was glad. And with him he brought out of Dimbar the dragon helm of Dorlomin, thinking that it might lift Túrin's thought again above his life in the wilderness as the leader of a petty company. But still Túrin would not return to Doriath, and Beleg, yielding to his love against his wisdom, remained with him, and did not depart. And in that time he labored much for the good of Túrin's company. Those that were hurt or sick he tended. He gave to them the lembas of Melian, and they were quickly healed, for though the gray elves were less in skill and knowledge than the exiles from Valinor, in the ways of the life of Middle-earth, they had a wisdom beyond the reach of men. And because Beleg was strong and enduring, far-sighted in mind as in eye, he came to be held in honor among the outlaws. But the hatred of Mîm for the elf that had come into Bar and Donwedd grew ever greater, and he sat with Ebon his son in the deepest shadows of his house, speaking to none. But Túrin paid now little heed to the dwarf, and when winter passed and spring came, they had sterner work to do. In summary, Thingol gives Beleg leave to go and protect Túrin in the wilderness. Belin asks for a sword, and Thingol gives him Anglachel, a powerful sword made from iron that fell from the heaven, by Eöl, the father of Maeglin. Melian gives Beleg lembas bread to aid him. Meanwhile, Túrin and his band of outlaws capture a dwarf named Meme and demand that he take them to Amon Rûdh. Túrin and Meme realize that one of the outlaws killed Meme's son, and Túrin promises to pay recompense. Beleg finds Túrin, and he assists the outlaws and again attempts to persuade Túrin to return to Doria. Meme and his other son come to hate Beleg. I didn't realize on the first reading of this, from when I read it earlier, that so much of it is just about the history of this one dwarf. Like, so much of this chunk is just about his background.
It's so sad.
I think what's interesting about it, yeah, it is.
Meme.
It is kind of. He just.
I like Meme a lot just because of the trials he's gone through. He's stalwart.
I think he's so fascinating because I think it was important to give that context for the history of him and why he hates the elves so much.
Yeah,
because he just really hates Beleg. But Túrin and his buddies killed his son, and he just lets them live there. Like, he just lets them live. I mean, he's kind of at their mercy in a sense, but he doesn't seem to have hatred for Túrin, even though Túrin and his buddies killed his son.
So that I think it's important to give a little bit of context, and I don't know if I fully understand it. So Meme, who's a part of the, quote, the petty dwarves, who are diminished to just him and his sons, they hate the Eldar, but most of all the exiles who were in Valinor and came to the land later.
Right.
Because the dwarves have been in that land for so long, they've delved caves deep underground, and they have this ownership of it. So that's really the context, right? That's why they hate him so much.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think because it made it sound like they don't really. I mean, they don't necessarily like the Grey Elves.
Well, they've also been hunted by the Grey Elves.
But they have been hunted, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it says that they had stolen their land and their homes.
Yeah.
And then now you have this like remnant of a group of dwarves, and maybe there's deeper history of that. Like, reason why they're a remnant is because their houses, their homes, their lands were taken from them.
Well, let's return to this in a second, because that's kind of the second half of this. But the first part is Beleg going back to Doriath and talking to Thingol and Melian. I thought this was pretty cool. Thingol has changed. Have we talked about this? Thingol used to be so hard. He was like, nobody can come into Doriath. And now he just lets whoever come in. And I think Baron softened him up quite a bit.
But yeah, he's a softie now.
He's a softie now, yeah. But he's like, yeah, I forgave this guy who, I mean, he's talking about Túrin, who has kind of just been not so good, But Thingol's pretty quick to show him mercy and give him pardon, and then he just starts handing out gifts to whoever wants them,
Speaking of gifts, he gives him a lightsaber.
That's right.
Huh?
It says it. Okay, here's my argument, and it's ironclad. It was made of iron that fell from heaven as a blazing star, and it would cleave all earth-delved iron. So, the beginning of the Phantom Menace, when they're like cutting through that big iron door with the lightsabers?
Yeah.
It's like that, but a sword.
Maybe.
It cuts like butter.
But it's a bad sword. It's a twisted
sword. It's a red lightsaber.
Yeah. It's
made by a dark elf.
I love this. Yeah. We hear about Eöl again, who he kind of had his own chapter earlier.
Wait, where did we hear about Eöl?
He's the one who he was the smith. Eöl. He was the smith that created the sword. He crafted the sword.
I know, but when before did we hear about it?
Oh, so the chapter, that's a while back now, but of the one about Maeglin, it talks about him just being this brooding, dark.
Oh, father
figure.
of Maeglin.
Yeah, and Maeglin's kind of got this darkness too, but we haven't heard about that in a while.
So when Melian looks at the blade and says, "There's malice in the sword," the dark heart of the smith still dwells in it. It will not love the hand it serves, and neither will it abide with you long. I mean, that is about as foreboding of what might be to come in the future.
Yeah.
Now, when
Go ahead.
the TV show talks about dark-skinned elves in the lore, don't they say like, "Oh, that's definitely in there"? Are they just equivocating on the word dark? They say, "Oh, there's dark elves in the story, so we can have dark elves."
I don't know how that's related to anything we've been talking about thus far, but just
he's a dark elf.
That phrase is in there at the bottom.
Because of dark elf. That's no, because they specifically say dark skinned, don't they? That's what they claim. The Rings of Power people.
I don't know. I don't know enough to comment on this really, but there are like, the Morquendi or the Elves of Darkness and stuff. There are like, but that has more to do with them not seeing
their moral character, not what they look like.
The Morquendi are the ones who never saw the light of the trees or anything.
Yeah.
And then this seems to be more like his, temperament or.
I see. Yeah. I'm with you.
I think, right? Like he's a dark elf. It's funny. I was thinking about this, like how we may have talked about this before, but how Tolkien uses capitalization to stress certain things, like things that we wouldn't capitalize as we're writing. He does sometimes. I can't. There's not one here. Oh. I can't think of it.
Well, like, I'm struggling to. Yeah. Okay. Next time we find it,
I can't. I don't know if this is a specific one, but something like this, where like imagine like in a sentence, the word truth was like the truth.
Okay. Yeah. That's a British thing.
Right? You think so?
Yeah. You know what? Doing that.
Well, I was thinking like, I think Lewis and
Chester Lewis does it too.
Yeah.
And then when I came to America, I'd be corrected on it by people. So I know it's not an American thing.
It's not an American thing for sure. But I think it's a really good way to. The reason I brought it up is because I'm wondering if dark elf, which is capitalized, is like a term that refers to specific type. Because I'm pretty sure he's Sindar, Eöl. Are the Sindar?
Yeah.
Part of the dark elves?
Yeah,
I can't remember.
They are.
But anyway, so it might just be like more of a title that refers to anyway, so my point is Eöl is, even if that's his title as like the group that he's from, it's also his character. Like he is a brooding and dark elf. And okay, we got way off track on that, but I do think doesn't the sword kind of remind you of the ring? How it sort of has a personality and it has a will of its own.
It just reminds me of like items in the Lord of the Rings, because they all have lore. So it's of lesser lore than the ring. But yeah, I see what you're saying, how it has like a character of its own. But you get the impression of that with all the swords that they meet, and they have some kind of
They kind of have the fingerprints of the creator in it, right? And but what's interesting is, do the Silmarils have the fingerprints of Feanor?
Why would they? Wait, weren't they found objects?
No. He made them. Feanor made them.
Oh yeah. I was thinking of the sorry, I'm getting confused with the Arkenstone. Sorry. That's not even related to this.
Because you have this sword, which is made and can be corrupted. It has like the will of its master in a sense, or it will not love the hand it serves.
Right.
It says the dark heart of the smith still dwells in it, and that's very ring-like. That's what Sauron, like he puts his will inside the ring.
Right. It's funny though, because it's not just the objects, right? Like, isn't it said that Shadowfax will not bear other riders, or like certain riders, like,
yeah,
or maybe anyone besides Gandalf or whoever Gandalf wants. but that's a horse, obviously. But there is this like this kind of agency that these different creatures and tools have in them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is very foreboding, and it's one of those words, Cameron, that that you like, that sound like it sounds dangerous and kind of Anglachel. Like it kind of
It
sounds
sounds like
harsh.
It sounds like
a
what it
noise a
is.
sword would make at some point, like clanging against another.
It's an onomatopoeia.
Yeah.
Anglachel. Anglachel.
Oh dear. I like the wordplay later on, which I thought was biblical as well. When Meme, who seems I couldn't understand him. I thought he was treacherous for a moment, because
I was thinking that too.
he's like, I'll take you where I live, but then you find out that, well, he's the only person who lives there, so it's not really like he's being a traitor to a group of people. Really sad that he finds his son dead. But the name of the place, Baron Danweth, the House of Ransom, is kind of cool later on, where Túrin says to Meme, if I could recall that shaft, I would. Now, Baron Danwed, this house shall be called in truth. And if ever I come into wealth, I will pay you a ransom of gold. There was something biblical about that to me. There's word plays like that in sacred scripture. I just thought it was a cool literary.
Which
Explain,
page are you on?
This is 203. Are you
Yeah.
saying like originally Meme says this meaning he's the one who is being held ransom? Like they're asking him to take him to his home and kind of in a threatening way, right? That's why he calls it the House of Ransom. But it's kind of flipped when now.
No, it's just poetic. So that's it. I'm just pointing out that, I mean, it sounds like that's just the name of the house for whatever reason. We don't necessarily discover, unless he's naming it on the spot there. Which
I thought he did.
I
thought he did name it on the spot. At the earlier up in 203,
for
says,
so it shall be called.
For so it shall be called.
Maybe, yeah,
Baron
maybe.
Danweth. You should know that one.
Yeah,
maybe. Maybe he's naming it on the spot. That's an interesting question. Is he naming it on the spot? What do people think?
Yeah.
I don't know, because it
shall be called is now and into the future.
But why would he call it that?
I think
he's
calling
being
it
held
that
ransom.
Because he's being held ransom by these outlaws.
Why would he not have a name for his house before that?
No, it probably has a different name. Everything has 50 names in this story. We've had multiple names throughout this.
Well,
okay, this is so. I'm curious what you're saying, because how I understood that was Meme is saying he's the one being held ransom when they enter the house, and that's why he gives it that name. And then Túrin, after he learns that his men killed his son, are saying now they're the ones that are being held ransom. Indeed, this is the House of Ransom.
How the turntables.
That's what he's saying. If the writers of The Office were writing this somewhere, that's how they would say this.
Yeah, it is one of those moments then, I guess. Yeah. But I just found it poetic and just a cool turn of
So
phrase.
say it again. Say your piece one more time. I just want to hear you say it and just listen instead of thinking other thoughts.
You get the introduction, the name of the house, and then you get the payoff of Túrin turning the phrase back on him as an act of pity. And there was just something biblical about that. That sort of, I don't know, turn of phrase is very scriptural.
And it's dwarf-like, Meme says. You speak like a dwarf lord of old.
Which is weird, because you were just responsible for the death of his son, and now you're like honoring him with a high honor, like you're like one of the great kings. That I just found that part a bit odd, that like your son's dead, and
I do think
that party killed your son, and then now you're like giving him this high honor. It was just odd to me.
Well, I could imagine you find yourself in a situation where you're totally at the mercy of your captors or something.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to really fight. And so you can see them through a lens of, is this where you're able to see like the honorable side of them, or because this is, I mean, obviously there's no way to properly repay killing a son, right? And
in the
so
moment, your
there's this
emotions
kind of-
could just be completely wrong. Like you're not feeling anything. You're just trying to process. I get that. It still was an odd interaction because obviously his hatred goes to Beleg and not Túrin.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
It's just like weird. And Beleg is like also showing love to them.
Right. Beleg is the best one of all of them.
Yeah. It's just hard to make sense of like how their psychology works.
Okay, Meme is melancholic because he's slow to react to things, and he found one friend, and he doesn't want any more friends. And then this Sanguine comes along, who's like laughing by the fire, and he's like, "Hey, I'm here!" And he starts to be friends with Túrin. He's like, "What? It was just me and Túrin, and we were fine. Like me and Túrin and my two sons."
And Meme's like, "I hate that guy."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's kind of okay. Well, we should wrap up here, but he's pretty mysterious, and there seems to be this starkness. He has this hate for the elf, and so I'm curious to see where this leads. I might know a little bit, but still curious.
I'm curious. I've read this twice, and I don't remember all of it.
Well, yeah, this is a great story so far. Túrin Bar. So, and it's
Greg,
what
should people do if they like what they heard?
Well,
what should they go ahead and do?
Yeah,
go ahead and rate us 3 Silmarils out of 3. Follow us everywhere at Before the Fellowship. Join the discussion on Discord, and send any comments or questions beforethefellowship@gmail.com. Join us next time as we read the greatest story you've never heard, The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien.